there and welcome back. I know some folks like to talk about each and every episode and they number. This is the 455th opportunity through this Thinking Out Loud platform I have here at saltwire.com to share with you stories, conversations, and perhaps some insights into some of the people that are making a difference in the world around us. And this was something that popped up. Obviously, healthcare has been the number one topic for the last little while. And a colleague of ours, Kathy Johnson, wrote this: community healthcare conversations draw a crowd in southwestern Nova Scotia. As it says, the Health and Wellness Minister, Michelle Thompson, who has been a guest on this platform, speaks with one of the people who attended the community healthcare conversation in Shelburne back on the 18th of January. It was hosted by the Health and Wellness Minister, Michelle Thompson, the Deputy Minister, as well as Nova Scotia Interim CEO and President Karen Oldfield. And that brings us to the introduction for today. And obviously, there are people in positions where they have a great deal of authority, and some of those positions are much more public than others. And I want to really give a warm welcome to Karen Oldfield, the interim CEO and director of Nova Scotia Health. Thank you so much for doing this. I really do appreciate your time.
Thanks, Sheldon.
So if we were
chat,
no worries at all. So if we were meeting at a coffee shop or something, and how would you describe your job? What would you tell people that you do?
I would tell folks that I'm in the middle of our government's plans and efforts to quote fix quote healthcare, to make it better for people, to use the words of our minister, ready, responsive, reliable. Those are three really important words that take on a great deal of meaning to those trying to effect change. The job is a little bit of digging to the bottom of the well to figure out, what we have and what we need to do. That's been done. And now it's putting the ladder together to climb out of the well and then to walk forward. So it is at once is the hardest job I ever had, but it's the most gratifying. It's the most motivating, spiritually uplifting and satisfying job I've ever had. So it's the hardest, but the best.
And to that point, I want to ask you about that journey to where you are today. Clearly, I've been covering politics for decades. You were former Premier John Ham's chief of staff for a brief time, and then it was the Halifax Port Authority where you worked as a CEO for 18 years. And as some people would describe it, the small resume gap before this opportunity came to you from the Premier. So tell me a little bit about the end of that chapter of your life and the conversation you had with Tim Houston to become this interim CEO. Tell me about that.
Well, after a very gratifying and successful career at the port, which I dearly loved, the opportunity to build the economy of our province, I retired. And coincidentally, at or about the beginning of COVID, so I did start to travel a little bit, but then the strings got pulled on that when we went into the shutdown and COVID. So I was home for a number of months doing a little bit of, consulting here and there, but looking for the next thing. And, as it turned out, I hadn't really been particularly active or involved in the provincial election, although I certainly was following it in the media, as with most Nova Scotians. As it turned out, the morning of the election, I received a telephone call, 7:23 a.m. I will never forget it, from now Premier Tim Houston. And the Premier asked me if I would be interested in being part of his transition team if that was the outcome of the day. And I did tell him at the time that I was considering a corporate offer. I was ready to go back to work, but had a corporate offer under consideration. So I would have to check with them to make sure that would be okay. And if it was okay, then I would I'd be happy to help in any way that I could. And so I checked. The first thing that happened is Premier Houston's, his Progressive Conservative Party did win. So then I had to make the phone call to check, and then basically I came in to be part of the transition team, and pretty much every day for the next 10 days, Karen, maybe you should come and do this, or Karen, maybe you should come and do this, or maybe you should come and do this. And then the Premier-elect, as he was at the time, he said, Karen, I'm thinking maybe the healthcare file. And I really had to think about it, Sheldon. I mean, that was massive. Like, it's the most important file. It's the biggest thing. It's huge. I had to look inside to see, A, if I had the energy, B, if I had the capacity, and C, if I really thought I could do it. And anyway, that was then, and this is now.
Clearly, ministers are given letters of intent, or I guess mandate letters. Was there anything similar for your role as the interim president and CEO of the Health Authority?
Not a mandate letter per se to me directly, but certainly through the minister's mandate letter to the health leadership team, very definitely. So it came in that way. And as you know, on September 1, the Premier did announce his health leadership team, of which I was a part. And I think it is important to just note that we have a team, and that team, which is comprised of the board administrator, Janet Davidson, and myself, the deputy, Janine Lagasse, and Dr. Kevin Orrell, remains intact to this time. But we're supported by many other clinicians and bureaucrats across the board. So while we may be the four that kind of meet every week and go through this, that, and the other thing, we are well supported by many people across both government and within our Nova Scotia health system.
This is a very public position. What you've been tasked with is a huge job, and I want to go back to the previous government had spent a long time trying to recruit someone for that role, and Dr. Brendan Carr, who was a healthcare executive, an emergency room physician, got that job. And there's been some criticism of that by the political side of this debate or discussion. Did you feel that was a warranted criticism, that the Premier replaced that role with someone who didn't have any direct medical experience or administration experience in the medical field?
It's a fair question, and to be perfectly frank, I've tried really hard over my career to understand what I need to do, understand what I can bring to the table, understand what I can and can't do, and where I need to bring in resources or others. One of the signs of a great leader, of course, is to recruit people who are smarter than you, who do different things than you do. So to be honest, I just put my head down and plowed straight ahead. I think, I'm very focused and almost singularly focused on the task at hand. And I find I try really hard not to listen to the noise. I don't want to be off agenda. When I go to work, I want to do what I need to do. So that's kind of been my approach for a long time, like 30 years. This isn't a new thing. So, what I think is important to understand is that there is the leadership component, and then there's the clinical aspects of what we have to do. And there are many clinicians around me who guide me, who give me lots of really good advice, all around me. So for example, we have Kevin Orrell and Janet Davidson, both clinicians who are on the health leadership team. We have our minister, and anybody who thinks that the minister is not actively invested in this team does not know Minister Thompson very well. She might as well be on the team as opposed to be the minister of health and wellness. So she really knows what she's talking about on the clinical side. And that's just this, that's the start of it. There are lots of folks around who have been very generous with their time and their ideas on the clinical side. Some retired, some not retired, some students. I mean, every day I get emails from clinicians with a good idea. And so I'm fortunate to be able to receive that and then figure out, my job from day one has been to remove barriers and to enable good ideas. That's my job. And I, in fairness, I think that's something that one could do without necessarily having a medical background.
You talked about leadership and that idea that, the leader is responsible for the successes and the challenges or failures. But I wanted to ask, how has your assessment of the administration of healthcare changed over the last 5 quarters?
It's, the deeper you get in, the more I realize just what hadn't been done, what should have been done, what needed to be done, what still needs to be done. I just want to give you an example, okay? And, we're really living with it right now. And that is human resources. So you can go back in history. These are all, substantiated facts. But in the late 90s, the nursing crisis we see today, it was predicted. It was forecasted. We knew. It was known. And not just in Nova Scotia, I want to be clear, but across the country. And yet, what steps were taken then to prepare for today? Like, where were the seats increased? Where were we recruiting? Like, how were we training, retaining, training, the professional development? Where was all of that stuff? And then one day we wake up and here we are. First, a pandemic and all of the things that come along with that, and losing even more people to burnout and all of the associated issues with the pandemic. So when I look at that, on the one hand, I get really upset, because when you can predict, you should be acting. So I never want to find myself in that spot where we can predict but haven't acted. That's very important to me. So I try to use as much data as possible to see out into the future, 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, so that we aren't in the same spot. So, and just as an example, I've talked before about, asking early on, where's our 10-year capital plan? So what are we doing here, people, over 10 years? Well, there was no 10-year capital plan. There's no 10-year capital plan. There is now, okay? And a capital plan needs to be rolling all the time. You just can't wake up one day and say, oh, well, we need a new hospital here. We need to always be planning for our infrastructure and always be planning for, what's coming around the corner and the people that we need for that day that we go around the corner. So maybe they need to be more tech savvy. So we really need to crystal ball. And I would argue that one of the biggest, findings, if you like, just to go back to your question, is that even if there was crystal balling, because there were people in the system who certainly were trying to do that, it just wasn't effected. It wasn't implemented. Decisions weren't made to act upon the information that was being seen. So, we got to fix that.
And everything you're talking about there has to do with a vision beyond the next electoral cycle. And you're in this world now where it's about the politics. I understand it's interim, and I want to ask you about that in a moment. But do you feel, taking on this responsibility, that in some ways you have to manage the expectations Nova Scotians have about when to expect things to improve?
Oh, yes, I think so. I mean, not just Nova Scotians, but, of course, our system, healthcare workers are Nova Scotians, but, it's very important to start with our healthcare workers and then to work beyond our healthcare workers directly to the patient. And so from that perspective, I see it, I could use a couple of different analogies, but basically you have to be able to throw and run at the same time. Okay, if we just go football, you need to be able to throw for the 3, the 5, the 7 year, but you need to be able to run to get the quick things done that really need to be done quickly so that people can feel a change. So we're talking about transformation. Transformation is really identifying what's wrong and then fixing it for today and tomorrow. But in the meantime, making sure that we're doing things that are important to people, and that people can feel and people can touch and people know that things are being done that will make it better for them today. So it's short game, long game, or short, medium, and long term. I mean, we could use any kind of way to describe it, but it's a dual strategy every day. We need to look long term, because the short termism is what got us here. So we have to look long term, but we got to fix short term too. So it's two things for sure. So adds to the complexity, no question about it.
Or the other analogy is it takes a long time to turn an ocean liner around.
Oh my gosh.
And if we're all standing on the deck and we all notice there are problems, how to communicate that you've heard it, the message has been received, and the orders have been given. I don't want to dwell on, but I think it's important for us, and you mentioned it when you were at the news conference last week about the deaths of Alison Holthoff and of Charlene Snow. And obviously very public and tragic face to this crisis in healthcare that we know it. Now, her husband, Alison's husband, Gunter, had released a statement to the media last week, and I'm not sure if you read it. It did read in part. Most of the changes announced had already been in the planning stages for months or years and will not have a real impact on our healthcare system in the same amount of time. What's missing is a sense of urgency. This is what Gunter had to say after that news release, the news conference. He says, I believe that all political parties, all levels of government need to be working together to solve this crisis. If not, our health system will never improve and it will fail others as it did Ali. So what do you say to him? What do you say to others who see what seems to be an insurmountable challenge with the system right now from a very tragic and personal point of view? The first
thing I would like to echo is what I also said last week at the news conference. My sincere condolences to him and to both of those families. It's heart-wrenching, and my heart drops. So I think that two things. I do believe that a number of the measures announced last week actually will help in the short term, in the very short term. So, for example, the patient advocates, which really would be a person who is able to provide comfort to somebody in a waiting room. It's water, it's a blanket, it's somebody to talk to, possibly somebody that can get a bit better information. How long am I going to have to wait? When is it my turn? I think that is very important. And while we've had volunteers providing this kind of comfort, it's been on a volunteer basis and maybe a little tiny bit hit and miss, because you don't know when you go to the emerge if there will be a person there or not to help you. So I actually think that's very important. And I think a lot of feedback that I've received is geared around somebody there that sees me, when I'm in the waiting room. So professionalizing that and standardizing that, I believe, will be something that people will see and feel in the immediate short term in an emergency room. I didn't have a chance to explain this, and you didn't really ask me, Sheldon, but I want to share that, I've been there. I'm a care provider for somebody who has chronic illness. I have a husband with kidney failure who's on kidney dialysis. I am in that hospital 3 times a week. Most folks in the hospital, they don't know it's Karen, the CEO, and I don't walk around saying that. But we've been in that emergency room many, many, many times. Me sitting beside him as a really scared wife, and a person who doesn't really know, what's going to happen, when is he going to be seen? I'm really nervous. He's screaming at me, I need meds. So I do get that, and so that's a long way of saying I do think the patient advocate, it will be very helpful. And I think that the other moves that were made, I believe that we will see some immediate short-term gains there in our emergency department. I think that the second point, which is political parties working together. Look, I don't get into the politics of it. What I say is this is all hands on deck. And no one has ever turned aside a bad idea. On the contrary, the minister and the deputy and myself, we've just spent the last 4 months going around the province listening and asking for good ideas. So, I really do think it's people need to work together. It's not really time for pot shots. It's time for ideas and working together and solutions and shoulder to the wheel as we do here in Nova Scotia. We did it well through COVID. Let's keep doing it. So that's just kind of my general approach. I'm very open. I'm very transparent. I want to work with people. And, I don't care where the idea comes from. Irrelevant to me. If it's good, I want to try to effect it.
And I think I heard that message loud and clear from the minister, from the deputy, from yourself. And you touched on human resources. I don't have this on my list, but you did talk about that as a challenge. And I think anyone within the system will tell you the same. I know someone who's a nurse, and for them not to be able to have vacation, them calling in sick so they're not forced into overtime. But it's a highly competitive market right now because the shortage exists nationwide, continent-wide. So just briefly, if you could, just touch on how you can reassure the people that are drowning in the system that there's help on the way.
So, if people ask, okay, Karen, what's the biggest thing that keeps you up at night? It would be this. It would be human resources, 100%. And across the board, it's physicians, it's nurses, it's pharmacists, it's lab techs, it's, respiratory technologists. It's across the board. So, you look at the universities, what can we produce? How can we expand, extend, and get them to partner? And all of that's happening. And then we look outside of Nova Scotia to find ways that we can build pipelines, which is also happening. And that's I guess one aspect, because that's recruitment. But the other big piece is retention. And, that's the one I'm really fixated with at the moment, because as I've gone around the province, I've heard time and time again, even though these are open to the public, I've been heartened by the fact that a lot of healthcare workers have joined the community conversations to share their perspective. And retention is huge, It's a challenging market. Like, this travel nurse thing is a thing. It's a big thing. And, I was in Yarmouth last week and was shared the story of a travel nurse who decided it would be a good thing to show her colleagues her paycheck. That didn't help me. It didn't help me. That, first of all, it's not nice. And second of all, it's so dehumanizing for those Yarmouth nurses. So I was really upset about that. But great, I'm upset. What can I do about it? So we need to find ways to meet those nurses where they are, and make sure we're doing everything we humanly can to bring the resources to them. We need more people, that's a for sure. But what if we did bring 1,000 more CCAs into the acute care sector? What if we did double the number of LPNs through the community college, which is currently 450? What if we took that up to 900? Okay, so that's another, big whack of people. And then we recruit from outside of Nova Scotia, and I'm talking about countries such as India, where they have excellent nursing programs. The Philippines, same thing, excellent nursing programs. And so, if through those means we have, I'm just picking a number, but let's say by the end of this year, 2023. We have 2,000 people that can come into this system and help our nursing staff. How would they feel then? How would they feel then? Well, we have started to employ or deploy a tactic, I guess. Instead of exit interviews, we're having stay interviews. Why do you stay? Why do you stay? What will it take to make you stay or help you stay? Why do you stay? And I'm telling you, those stories are spiritually uplifting. Here's one I really like. A few weeks ago, Saturday night, it was raining or snowing. I don't remember what, but anyways, I do like to get out and about, and I don't always like to tell people that I'm getting out and about. Anyway, this particular night was a Saturday night, and I did a little tour around the emerges in Halifax. Went to the HI, and I went to Dartmouth General, and I went to the Cobequid, and the stories about the Cobequid. First of all, I would just say they had a full complement of ER nurses, and everybody was in pretty good frame of mind. I was in the emerge speaking to the staff, and out of one of the patient rooms, a woman emerged, and I just caught her out of the corner of my eye, and I saw white shoes, and then I saw a white hose, and then I saw a white skirt, and then I saw a white shirt, and I'm sure if I kept looking, I would have seen the cap, but there was no cap, but she had her watch pin, and she had her RN, and she says to me, "Now, my dear, who are you?" So I said who I was, and I said, and who are you? And so she told me her name. She said, "I've been nursing for 51 years. She goes, "I worked 12 hours yesterday, and I'm working 12 hours today, and I love what I do, and I will die nursing unless my physical abilities give out sooner." So I said, would you mind if I asked somebody to come and speak to you so that you could share your story? Because she just loved it so much, right? It was really heartening for me. And then, in fact, today I just got an email out of my junk mail. Somebody from the Cobequid had sent a note, like you weren't announced. It was unsolicited. There was no agenda. You just chit chat with folks and understand where they are and what's on their minds and what they care about and what's important and how you can help. Right. So that's sort of how I do the job.
And I guess to just sum up, it's interim CEO and president. Have you put a time limit on that?
Well, yeah. I think it's a good question. I guess I'm loving it. Like, I'm just loving it. And so, I'm here at the pleasure, the minister, the premier. I'm doing the best I can. I'm doing, I'm putting, like, it's 24/7. I'm living it. So not really. I guess, we'll see how the cookie crumbles.
Karen Oldfield, I certainly value your time. I thank you so much for this. It's run a bit longer than what I had mentioned, but clearly you're passionate for the job, and I wanted to at least have this opportunity for Nova Scotians to get a chance to know this person who's been given such a huge job. So thank you.
Thank you, and a pleasure to have the opportunity. Thanks.